Welcome, everybody, to Survive and Advance on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Survive and Advance is brought to you by Replenishing Care Technology, the future of sports medicine. To go on and check out their PEMF machine, make sure you go to thegruelingtruth.net and click on the banner. I'm your co-host for Survive and Advance, Mike Goodpaster. And right now I'd like to welcome in my co-host, member of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, was on the 1981 National Championship team with Isaiah Thomas and Bobby Knight. Help me welcome to the show, as always, Steve Risley. How you doing, Steve?
Doing great today. It's a wonderful day out here in Los Angeles. Warm, sunny, hot, fires everywhere, but we're getting by.
Well, that's why it's hot. There's fires everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys, we've got a special guest today. If you've listened in the past to thegruelingtruth.net, you know we've got a show called the XFL Show that's been doing really well. And today we have the man that is the first commissioner of the XFL. Help me welcome to the show, Oliver Luck. How you doing, Mr. Luck?
Mike, I'm fine. Steve, good morning.
Good morning. It is morning out here.
It's morning out in your place. There. That's right.
Yeah, it's 9 o'clock in the morning out here. So.
All right, let's start at the basics, basically, at the beginning. When were you first contacted about this, or did you contact somebody about the XFL, and what made you want to become involved?
So I had been working at the NCAA. I was one of two executive vice presidents that worked right below Mark Emmert, the NCAA president. Really enjoyed my job. I was in charge of our regulatory affairs, which is something only lawyers can love, of which I'm one. And one of Vince's guys reached out to me and said, "Hey, Oliver, as you may know, Vince announced back beginning of the year that he's relaunching the XFL. And he'd be interested in talking to you. Would you mind taking a meeting?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to. I love football. I think I respect the game, and I'm always interested when folks are launching alternative leagues, if you will." So I spent a couple of Saturdays in Stamford, Connecticut, where WWE is headquartered, and spent a lot of time with Vince. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit skeptical initially. Because if you remember going back to 2001, which was the first iteration of the XFL, it didn't go well, right? And was a one and done, a phrase that's not often used in football, but would apply to the XFL. And I asked some pretty tough questions of Vince in terms of how are you going to operate this league, why will it be different, et cetera. And I became convinced of a couple of things, really. But the summary of it all was this: that all the things that are needed to launch a league that can become sustainable were in place, right? Vince was deadly serious about it. He's very passionate about the sport. He acknowledges some of the mistakes that were made in 2001 and won't repeat those. He's making a very, very substantial capital commitment. And maybe most importantly, he had done his homework, right? So long before I was talking to Vince, this past spring, he had spent lots of time and effort and money, to ensure that he could get the proper insurance, right, for a professional football league. That's not a no-brainer in today's world, certainly because of the concern about, brain trauma, and make sure that you can get, a workers' comp package that would protect players, in the various states that we plan to be in. So he had done a lot of work to really make sure that there were no obstacles to this. He didn't jump in, at sort of the last second. And that impressed me because I've been a part of startups before, whether it was with NFL Europe or with MLS, with the Houston Dynamo, and I know how important time can be when you're launching, a league and or a team. And so I gave a lot of credit to Vince as I was thinking about this for having the foresight, for example, to go, make sure that he can, in fact, get insurance and lock that insurance down. And all those other things that you really just there's no substitute for time. And I think with Vince is approaching it the absolute right way. And I became convinced that this league was not only a very positive league for the sport, but also sustainable in the long term, and that's what, quite honestly, attracted me to the opportunity.
One of the things that McMahon said in his press conference all around January 25th when he started to announce the formation of the league, that he wanted to re-image football. How do you re-image football, and what does that look like through the eyes of the XFL?
So, take a typical football game, be it an NFL game or a major college game. And let me emphasize that we're not a competition to either one of those two great institutions. We're much more of a complement, right, as a spring league. But if you take, those what's happened at the NFL or at the major college level, what are the things that people complain about, football fans? And I'm one of those football fans, obviously. So it's the duration of the game. It's the lack of actual action during the course of a 4-hour game. It's the sort of number of stoppages, right, which prevent that flowing sort of rhythmic game that I think we'd all like to have. So when Vince talked to me, he said, listen, I want you guys to take a look at the game, look at it from all different angles, and try to figure out if we can't figure out a way to have a game that's fast-paced, with a high number of plays, much like you get in sort of major college football today with teams that are running, the fast-paced offenses. You get 90 plays per team per game. You get a much more flowing game where there's drives where you have a 12 or a 13 or a 14 play drive without a stoppage, right? Without a TV timeout, without a quarter break, without a referee's review that may take up 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. And it's not just fans that complain about those stoppages. It's coaches and players. Right? Players want to get into a groove, whether it's basketball or football or any other sport. So we tried to gather a group of really competent football folks. John Fox, the former NFL coach, was involved. Jim Caldwell, Doug Flutie. I wanted somebody who had played up in Canada, right, as well as in the NFL and, of course, in college here in the U.S. I had a number of folks that were involved with this. And we tried to say, can we create this fast-paced game, fewer stoppages, still be friendly to the advertisers, right? Because it's important, from a commercial standpoint. But have a game that's that can get done in 2 hours and 45 minutes. A little bit like football was, as I remember playing it in college in the 70s and the NFL in the 80s, right? Remember the Heidi game? Remember that game with the Jets and I think the Raiders, and it would go into the last minute of the game, and it had kind of dragged on a little bit, and it was over 3 hours, and the network cut away to show Heidi, right? Grandfather. Right? And the whatever network that was swamped with complaint calls from consumers because the game, they couldn't see the end of it. This is before the internet. Nobody knew who won. Right. Certainly the gamblers were probably very concerned about that. So. That's what Vince has asked us to do. We're in the process still of doing that. But so what, you may ask, what does that actually mean? So that means, for example, we may have a 25-second play clock, right? You may not know this. The CFL has a 20-second play clock. And Flutie said, hey, I got used to that 20-second play clock. You just get up to the line of scrimmage, you hustle. You have a sugar huddle, basically. You rarely do you huddle, but you have sort of a sugar huddle. But, if you train that way, guess what? You can play that way. And that's sort of that constant flowing action just to cut down some of that dead time, some of that idle time that exists in all of major college as well as professional football today. That's really part of what we're trying to do.
And I got to tell you, we owned Colts season tickets from 1984 when the Colts first came to Indianapolis, and there was nothing more painful than going to the stadium and watching a football game. And because there's so much dead time at the stadium, between TV timeouts, commercial timeouts, everything. And we ended up, I remember joking about when we finally moved out here to Los Angeles, we would end up watching the game on the big screen and not even watching the game live because invariably we had tickets on the 20-yard line. And as soon as the ball came down to our 20-yard, we were 10 rows up. And then the TV cameras would come right in front of you. And they'd go up high to get the shot, and you couldn't even see the play. So you stare at the big screen all the time. So it's well said that, it is kind of painful to watch an NFL game live with all the dead time that occurs in the game.
Well, it's funny, and you could probably do a whole bunch of, sessions on this, but you take the three major American sports, football, basketball, baseball, right? We actually stop the game to have commercials. That doesn't happen in the other sports, if you will, that the world plays, whether it's rugby or soccer or whatever else, right? And so, we're not going to change the fundamentals of that. We're still going to have a football game, and inevitably there are breaks in a football game, and it's going to be blocking and tackling and running and catching and kicking and scoring and all that sort of stuff. But we think there's a way to tweak the game, to modify it. Again, have that fast pace, bring conditioning back into the game. When was the last time you saw an NFL player that needed to come out because he was gassed? Hands on his knees, gasping for breath.
Last night, yeah.
Yes, preseason.
Last night, watching preseason football.
Preseason, yeah. Well, they're not quite in shape yet.
Yeah, runs 2 routes and then he's out for 4 plays. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. So
So
I'm very hesitant to criticize any other league because I love the NFL. They're paying my attention, so I want them to be very healthy. But I think there's some opportunity in doing what we're doing. And it's not really reinventing the game. Again, we're going to have blocking, tackling, catching, running, all those things that 11 on 11. All those things that people obviously enjoy watching. But we think there is a way to pick up the pace a little bit, right, and have a little bit more of a sense of urgency, and have the game flow more, right? Sports should be about rhythm and flow. And you're a former basketball player, Steve, so you know that, right? And
Sure.
all those constant breaks, all the the calls that stop the game, that don't allow you to get into that flow. And I think players perform better, and it's more entertaining when there's flow to a game.
We just go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say we just float away from Coach Knight as much as we could. We don't get yelled at. So we float away from him as much as we could. But go ahead, Mike.
All right, so the one thing I have noticed from reading about your league is it seems like you're going to be more family-oriented, and I know that I come from a world with arena football, indoor football, where the biggest thing, I think, to drawing a crowd is to become really heavily involved in the community. Do you have any plans set up or any idea where you want to go that way?
Well, I think in today's world there are a couple of things that are very important for, a football league, particularly for a new football league. So, one of those is being engaged in the community, right? And we're in the process now of selecting our cities. We'll have players that more or less resemble the demographics, if you will, of a major college team or of an NFL team. So there'll be guys that will care about a whole bunch of issues that are in the news, right? So we want to right off the bat, literally probably before we even sign our first player, have an idea in each of the 8 markets we're going to be in, what we can do socially, right? What we can do in terms of community service to help that community. I don't want to overemphasize it, obviously, because there's our focus is going to be on providing a high quality level of football. But knowing these guys, having been around the college game for a long time and the NFL game for a long time, most of these guys really do want to help, right? So we're going to try to provide opportunities for those in partnership with the sort of political and civic leadership that exists in every one of our 8 cities. The other thing that's important to mention, and I said this to Vince, is that the other thing that I think the American public expects beyond sort of civic engagement from a sports team, they also expect very high health and safety protocols. And my plan is to have the highest health and safety protocols that we can for our players. In large part because it's the right thing to do, but also because I don't think the American public, which loves football and appreciates it and loves to watch, but I think they also want to make sure that the game is as safe as it can be, right? Knowing that it's a physical sport, right? But we plan to do everything within sort of our power at the league and at the team level to make the game as safe as it can possibly be.
Yeah, and on that, I know the CTE is a huge issue right now. And my concern, because we do an NFL Legend show, I've interviewed a lot of older players that have had some problems. But will there be something written in for players after they've retired, not just concentrating on when they're playing, but what happens to them afterwards?
Yeah, we haven't really talked, to be very honest, about sort of post-XFL playing career. But that's a good point, right? That is a very good point. And most of these guys that we'll have, maybe all the guys that we'll have, will be guys who obviously have played college football, may have spent some time in the CFL, probably had some sort of activity with the NFL, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 years or a cup of coffee in a training camp. So at some point we have to begin to address that. We haven't really talked about that simply because of the sheer number of other things that are important. But I do think that Myself having played, I'm a vested player in the NFL system, and having lots of former teammates, some of whom are doing very well, and some of whom are struggling a little bit, not necessarily with CTE, but with all sorts of other sort of physical maladies as well. I do think that's a good point, something we can begin to look at.
Yeah. You talked about. I guess you're going to run with 8 teams initially. Your markets. How are you defining your markets? Are you going to try and compete directly with the NFL? Are you going to try and define new markets? You're giving a lot of thought to that. And where do you think is a good fit for the XFL to fit into?
Sure. So we sent out an RFP to about 30 markets, 30 cities, and we've gotten back some phenomenal responses. The metric that we're using basically is this, and this is the 15-second elevator speech. If you ask Vince McMahon, Vince, why are you supporting this league financially? Vince would say, well, he said, our research done by McKinsey, the big consultancy, our research indicates there are 40 million passionate, die-hard, fanatical football fans in this country, and they tell us, those 40 million, they want more football. And they want football in the spring, right? Where we don't compete with the NFL or with major college ball. Now, they want more football, but it has to be good football. It has to be a good quality game. So we believe that, we're going to go to markets where there's a lot of those 40 million diehard football fans, right? Season ticket holders for, obviously, NFL teams, folks that, go to college games as well, and people that really enjoy football. It's America's favorite sport. And if you look at the number of football games that are played in January, all of a sudden, right, there's a couple of college games left, and of course you have the NFL playoffs. Really, there's just one football game played in February, right, the Super Bowl, and then it drops off the map, for February, March, April, May. So we think there's an opportunity in that space to build a sustainable league, but really we're going to build it with a real focus on that passionate, die-hard football fan. Now, we hope, because of our very family-friendly, family-affordable prices, that passionate football fan may not just go to the game with his buddy, but may take his whole family, right? Or may take, 3 or 4 of his friends at work that normally wouldn't go to a game, because instead of paying, $120 for a ticket, you can pay $25 for a ticket. So we think that's important as well. But we think really this is geared towards that passionate, die-hard, fanatical football fan who's told us, right, in all of our research, yes, I want more football. I want to watch, both live and at home, more football. And I need to do that in a time when there is effectively no football, the spring.
Yeah, and you talked about the fans there, and I know I've seen in different articles written that you guys plan on having the fans having a huge voice in this league. Exactly how will that work?
Well, we're talking about a lot of different things to give a voice to the fan, right? And some of the ideas are fascinating. I'm not going to share any with you as well, because we haven't really decided on things, and I'd rather not have anybody speculating. But we're trying to figure out how we use technology, right, to allow that fan to have a stronger voice. And that doesn't mean we're going to allow fans to call plays. I think that would be a fundamental deviation from the way. There
was actually an arena team or an indoor team last year that tried that, and I don't think it worked out very well.
Yeah, there's technology issues, but there's also, is that just a good idea sort of issue, right? I'm not sure that's a good idea. But, we think it might be interesting for fans to, have access to an algorithm, right, that says, okay, on 4th and 2, if you look back at 20 years of NFL history, here's how often you made it in this kind of a situation. Let's see what the coach does, right, and at least have sort of that information as they sit there and watch the game. So there's, as you can imagine, if you sit down, in front of the whiteboard and begin to just have a brainstorming session about how to provide the fan a voice, there's lots of interesting things that I don't think would be considered gimmicky, right? So I'm very, very reluctant to, sort of go down a road with the XFL where there's any sort of gimmickry, because I don't think the American public likes gimmicks, right? I think the people, they want to see football and not gimmicks, right? And that's very important. So we have to be very careful not to do sort of gimmicky things. To me, fans, crowd sourcing a play call isn't really what the game is about. But I think there's some other ways that we can provide a voice, for the fan, whether it involves football or, issues around the game as well, right? It is clear from our research that fans want to be closer to the players. They want to know what happens, in the locker room at that pregame talk, right? They're fascinated. They want to hear what happens in the huddle, right? For those of us who've played the game, there's no mystery about the huddle, right? But for people that haven't played football, they really are curious what goes on in the huddle. What does the play call sound like? What's the kind of camaraderie? What's that motivational 10-second, sort of speech coming from a center in that huddle? They want to have access to things that historically have been, excluded from their purview. And that's where I think we can provide, access and provide a little bit of a voice to the fan that may be a little bit different than what, the standard fare, if you will.
Yeah, no, I read, the research that you guys are doing. It's interesting things. Can you touch on a little bit about the social issues tied with football right now, the taking a knee? You guys stated in your McMahon stated in his press conferences that he's not going to allow players with a criminal record to play in his league. Can you kind of touch on all that concept of the social league, which seems to be the biggest plague the NFL has right now, whether it's justified or not? I don't know whether it's they're not breaking the law, but, it is causing a lot of discern in the NFL. How are you guys going to address all that? And interesting about the no criminal record, that kind of eliminates some talent.
Well, I'll touch on both issues. Vince feels very strongly that players should stand for the national anthem, and that's something that more than likely will embed in our contract, right? So listen, if you want to play in our league, here's one of what probably will be many requirements, including community service. So that's something that he feels very strongly about, and we will absolutely implement that. In terms of his statement regarding we don't want players with a criminal record, I think the best way to put it is that we want high character, high quality guys, right? So as important as an individual's athletic skill or football skill is his character level. I think we have to be really careful about what does a criminal record mean, and this topic is something I'm somewhat familiar with because of my time at the NCAA, right? Where you ask yourself, well, what if a kid was a juvenile, is 17 years old, and got caught smoking pot? That there might be a juvenile record he has that could be sealed. We may never know about that. Or what if there was something that happened while a kid was on campus, and it was not a criminal court, but it was maybe he was suspended for a semester because of a university administrative or adjudicatory proceeding, based on a preponderance of the evidence, not on beyond a reasonable doubt. Two fundamentally different evidentiary standards. What if he was suspended for a semester in college because of a comment he may have made to a professor or a fellow student? Is that a criminal record? It's a black mark against the young man. So what if a kid plea bargains down to a misdemeanor? There's all sorts of issues. We have to develop protocols to deal with those. I don't think it's as simple as saying nobody with a criminal record will play in our league, because it's a much more nuanced question. But ultimately, we will absolutely respect Vince's desire that we have high-quality people in our league. He feels strongly about that. That's the standard he has for all the athletes in WWE, and that's important, obviously, to our entire system. So I think we'll focus on that. So that'll be one of my many things on the to-do list is to really develop a little bit of a more nuanced approach to make sure we get high-quality guys. But I also believe that there are certain cases where guys deserve a second shot at playing professional football.
Yeah, and I think that's
my next question would be this: how do you plan on finding the players? I don't know if you guys. I'm sure you guys have looked at this a little bit. Are we looking at a draft? Are we looking at a tryout? If you have a draft, are you going to make it territorial to try to have like if you get a team in Indianapolis and a kid was a star at IU, we want to make sure that kid's there because it helps draw the crowd.
Sure. We will have a draft. We may have multiple drafts, right? Because we're not subject to the NFL's collective bargaining agreement. So theoretically, if there's a kid who's 2 years out of high school, who's played 2 seasons of college ball, he says he's done with college and wants to earn some money, that may be a kid that we can put into some sort of a supplemental draft, because again, we're not subject to the 3-year out of high school rule that the NFL has in its collective bargaining agreement. So there'll be a draft. We want to be completely transparent in terms of how player A ends up on team B, right? And that means that effectively our coaches at the team level, the personnel directors at the team level will decide how they stock their rosters. We think that makes sense. We think that we'll have head coaches that have a little bit of a variety of offenses. Some might be a little bit more sort of two-back, traditional NFL-style pro sets. Others might be running a little bit more of a wide open offense. So, we want that coach to decide, hey, I need this kind of a quarterback or that kind of a quarterback that fits my system, so I can kind of run my offense and succeed. But it'll be done, very transparently, and there'll be a draft. But there could be multiple drafts, multiple supplemental drafts. We may end up, early on signing quarterbacks maybe a year out of our launch in the spring of 2020, and have just a quarterback draft, right, to sort of stock our franchises with top-notch quarterbacks. So there's lots of work to do in that space, but ultimately, I believe that there's a very, very deep pool of talented players. I've been involved with college football for a long time, including serving on the CFP selection committee, and watched a lot of college football, probably like you guys. And I think the talent level of the college game is as good as it's ever been, right? And that's in large part because you got great weight training, great strength coaches, great coaching going on, better nutrition. I mean, everything is better about the college game at both the big school level, but even going into the 1AA and even down to the Division II level, there's some really talented players, and they're just a little bit too small, too slow, for the NFL. But gosh, they want to play, and we're kind of excited about giving those kids an opportunity to play.
Now, one of the things that I looked at, it appears that Mr. McMahon is going to fund this league out of his own pocket. You guys are not going to sell franchises at this point in time, and I know you're looking at an average salary about $75,000 a player average. Your estimated insurance costs are going to be a little bit over $10 million a year to provide the insurance you guys want to provide. The startup fees have got to be enormous. Is this a smart move to just fund it? And what's the purpose of him funding it entirely on his own and not selling franchises?
Yeah, so we will be what we call a vertically integrated league, right? So the league will own and operate all of the 8 franchises. We have no plans at this point to sell those franchises. That may change 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Sure.
Who knows? That's ultimately will be Vince's decision. Vince is an incredibly successful entrepreneur. He's built WWE from a local sort of touring show in the Northeast into a global entertainment icon. I mean, it's really phenomenal. The company.
And I'm old enough to remember those when wrestling was regional. And I remember that. I'm Dick the Bruiser.
Oh, so I'm old enough as well.
Yeah, I remember all that. And you get up Saturday morning, you watch all, and how the McMahon family integrated all this and brought it all under one umbrella. And
I grew up in Cleveland, and I was a fan of Johnny Powers. When we were kids, we'd do the power lock to each other.
We had Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan, Blackjack Lanza Mulligan, Dick the Bruiser.
Yeah, those are awesome memories.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up the fact that I'm not as old as either one of you guys. I just wanted to bring that up.
No, but I remember that every Saturday morning. I was mesmerized by it, and to see. And I watched the special on Andre the Giant, and how talked a lot about how Vince brought that all together. So he is a business genius, but it seems like he's
done a remarkable job, and this is a substantial capital commitment that he's made to the XFL. But I guess I would just say, I wouldn't bet against Vince in terms of his business acumen, and he's making a substantial commitment. But what he is looked at in the past and built has worked out pretty well for them, right? All I got to do is look at WWE, a publicly traded company. The stock has gone, through the roof, very successful, and that business is a very, very healthy business. So I'm not sure I'd want to bet against him. But I think the business model certainly in the early days is a good one because it allows us to make quick and easy decisions. Quite honestly, I don't have 8 owners that I gotta get on the phone to talk to and get build consensus, etc. And if you look back at what I would consider to be the most recently launched professional sports league, MLS, Major League Soccer, this is effectively the model that they started off with back in 1996, which was a vertically integrated model. And then they began to bring external owners in, right, as they sold operating units in the various franchises. So that's worked pretty well for MLS. It's a league that I have a lot of familiarity with. I ran the Houston Dynamo franchise for 5 years when we launched in Houston, and we're quite honestly taking a page out of that book because they wrote a pretty good chapter, so to speak.
Yeah, and when you look at this, most major networks are with another football league. Is this something that I know you probably haven't looked that far into it yet, but is this something maybe you do through streaming?
Well, I think in today's world there are multiple opportunities. I would say that we would anticipate and I think would quite honestly need a linear television partner and as well as as a sort of digital broadcast partner. I would see both in our future. I think it's hard for anything to go all digital just because that's for many folks it's still a somewhat challenging space.
Yeah.
There's still something to be said for the exposure that you get on a linear broadcast network, be that one of the sort of the big four, if you will, or even one of the smaller ones. But I'm not sure I don't think we'd be well served to be only a digital product at this point. So all the leagues that have played around with digital have done so as an experiment, right, as a little bit of a test case, a beta case, but they've relied primarily on their linear broadcast to really sort of deliver the freight.
All right, Steve, do you have any final questions? I know we promised you'd be about a half hour, so we don't want to go over that. I know you're busy. Final question, Steve?
Yeah, one more question. Describe your season. I mean, what's the season going to look like in 2020 for the first XFL season? What's your game schedule?
Sure, we've got
playing.
We've got 8 franchises. There'll be a 10-game regular season. We prefer to play on Sunday afternoons. Quite honestly, that's sort of standard NFL game time. We think that's when that void for that passionate football fan is evident right on a Sunday afternoon. So we may have a few games on Saturday or Saturday evening, but primarily Sunday. There'll be 2 semifinal playoff games. That'll be week 11, and then we'll have our championship on week 12. So it'll be a 12-week season, relatively short, and we'll have the opportunity for our players. If they have an opportunity in the NFL, at the conclusion of our season, they'll have a chance to go, to an NFL training camp and fight for an NFL roster spot. We think that's important because obviously the NFL, is the king. They're going to celebrate their centenary, their 100-year anniversary next year, and we think it's important for any of our players to have that pathway to the NFL because that still is, obviously the gold standard in professional. Not just professional football.
Yeah, let me follow up. Do you see yourself initially as a feeder system to the NFL, or a complement to the NFL, or an alternative product to the NFL? What does the XFL expect to work alongside the NFL?
Well, we don't see ourselves as a feeder league. We're not the NBA's equivalent of the G League, which is owned and operated by the NBA and is designed to make sure that there's a couple of good point guards and forwards and whatever, right? So we think that we can be a spring league and remain a spring league. We have zero intention of going to the fall. Remain a spring league that's entertaining, that's appealing to those 40 million football fanatics and their friends and family and and others. We will have players that play in our league who will go to the NFL. I think that's important. Listen, the NFL is again the gold standard, and we would want our players to have that ability, to move back to the NFL or for the first time to get to the NFL. But we also don't consider ourselves a developmental league. I think that if there's a 5 or a 6 year NFL quarterback who all of a sudden doesn't have a roster spot in the NFL, that guy would be very attractive to us because that's a pretty darn good player,
Sure.
That the NFL has trained up, and we would take that guy. I'm not sure there are other leagues that would take that guy. They consider themselves to be more developmental leagues who might only take a first year right out of college kind of a guy and try to develop him for the NFL. So we believe that we can create a pretty strong profile for each of our franchises and for the league without being considered a quote unquote developmental league for the National Football League.
I got to tell you,
and I
think in February, when you guys start playing on Sunday afternoons, you're cutting into my NASCAR time. So now I got to keep DVR in the NASCAR races so I can watch football. Still, which I'll watch football.
Well, I can tell you this: I'm tired of sitting there on an April or a May on a Sunday afternoon watching a baseball game, thinking, "Man, I wish it was September."
I think this is perfect. I mean, I had the greatest night of my life last night. I just watched football from about 4 o'clock on in Los Angeles.
I'll tell you what. I had a late game to watch. Of course, it was the Colts, out in Seattle against the Seahawks.
Yeah.
And but it felt like invigorating.
I know, wasn't it?
I was sitting in a restaurant with a couple of guys, and we were in Connecticut, so the Giants game was on. So I watched Baker Mayfield, and it just felt, oh my gosh, this is good. We're back in the swing of things.
It was a great night.
Well, I didn't get to watch any football last night because I was coaching my high school team at 100-degree heat.
By the way, Mike, how did your Bengals do last night? My Colts won. And my quarterback came back with a banshee last night and had a great game. He's back. I don't think it's Super Bowl right now for the Colts. So
Hope springs eternal. Let's not get carried away.
You can't go to the Super Bowl because this is the year I've waited 50 years for. The Bengals will win the Super Bowl this year. How about this? They beat the Colts in the AFC Championship game, and then next year we can flip that around and they both get the win.
I'm not buying that. Andrew's back.
All right, I can tell you. I can tell you this, Oliver. When they said they were going to break out the XFL again, I had doubts, and you can ask Steve this. I had doubts until they hired you, and I think Vince McMahon, almost everything he's ever touched has turned to gold. And the fact that he brought you on board to make you the commissioner, I know what you did with NFL Europe, the NCAA. I know what your career has been, and I think right there that verified that this is completely legit to me. And I also like the fact that he announced it 2 years before ever playing a game, so he would be able to have all his ducks in a row because, like I said, I've coached arena and indoor football where leagues have started, and they'll announce it in November, and they're playing a game by February, and it invariably fails. So I think the way you guys are doing this is the way it should be done, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm excited about it. I just have the utmost respect for the game, and a passion for the game. And when Vince approached me, I said, I got to be a part of this thing. I mean, it's fun to leave your fingerprints, all over this new league. So I'm very stoked, and putting together a good administration team to hopefully build a league that's sustainable, right? That really can complement the NFL and Major College Football. Two things I absolutely love too.
You're working for a pretty smart marketing genius too, so who can knows how to get things done, knows how to win and succeed, and I think it's gonna be hopefully it works for you guys this time. So we appreciate you taking time to talk to us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, Oliver.
Okay.
I want to remind everybody you can hear the CFL Weekly Pickup Show with myself, former CFL legend Robert Drummond, and Brian Schmidt on Wednesday night at 10 o'clock live on thegruelingtruth.net. You can hear all of our shows on Spotify now, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Oliver Luck, Steve Risley, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.